Welcome to the Startup Leaders Show, where we learn lessons from startup founders and executives. I am your host, Lisa Dreher, and I am excited to introduce our guest for today, Chris Taylor. He is the founder and CEO of Aalyria. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Lisa, thanks for having me.
Hey, it's so great to have you here today. Maybe we can start by having you give a little bit of background on yourself and then give us an overview of Aalyria.
Sure. Thank you for having me on. It's great. I spent 14 years in the Marine Corps as an enlisted infantryman in Force Recon Marine. I finished my undergrad while I was in my last 3 years in the Marine Corps at night. Left there, went to business school, went to work for 5 years, went back to graduate school, and have been working in both established businesses and startups ever since. And I'm really, really fortunate to be with such a great team at Aalyria. Some of your viewers may know that we acquired two different technologies from Google about 2 years ago to form Aalyria. One is a software platform, and one is a hardware platform. And when we mix them together, we like to say that we have a killer iOS and a killer OS and a killer peripheral. The software platform is a what we call a temporal-spatial software-defined networking platform. So multi-orbit, multi-domain, or all-domain connectivity platform. So satellites speaking to other satellites, speaking to other satellites, speaking to planes, speaking to balloons, speaking to ships, speaking to vehicles, speaking to ground stations, speaking to whoever. And the interesting thing is we can since we've created a digital twin of the planet's wireless connectivity, we can bring into existence networks that are not formed right now. They don't exist. And that's proven to be very interesting for our commercial customers and our public sector customers as well. And then the other technology that we have is a high-speed coherent light free space optics capability. So we are pushing no less than 100 gigs per second through the atmosphere, 60, 70, 80, 100 kilometers more, with about a tenth of a percent of a packet error rate, which is fantastic. Because some of your viewers may know, atmosphere is the bane of existence for light. But the team over the last 10, 15 years did such an amazing job solving the hard science problems that it is really the most capable free space optics capability out there right now.
Wow. Okay. First of all, thank you for your service.
Huh.
And second of all, okay, so what does this all mean? This whole multi-orbit, all of these, these capabilities and the solutions that you're bringing together. What does that enable? What does that make possible that maybe wasn't otherwise possible?
Yeah, it's a great question, Lisa. So think of it this way. Since the first satellite was put up in space, I think 1956, 58, we have continued to add capability in space, particularly. Let's call it $1 trillion worth of assets are in space. None of those assets were ever designed to speak to each other. So in a time now where whether it's a commercial satellite operator who's now buying in GEO, a commercial satellite operator in GEO who's now buying a commercial satellite operator in LEO, or deciding to create a constellation in MEO, none of those things also were designed to speak to each other. So what the space-time platform does is allow them to speak to each other, and then ultimately back to the ground, where those of us who live on planet Earth can make use of the capability. And then where infrastructure doesn't exist, and where we need more speed and capacity than radio frequency can give us, high-speed free space optics, which is where both commercial and government are moving to. That's the trend. Gives us basically an internet in space. Really enables us to push terabit connectivity through space and then back down. to the ground. So think of it as, when copper went to fiber, that sort of enormous transformation is where we are right now with space. We will have the ability to drive that type of connectivity, that type of transformation all over the world.
Wow. Okay. So, talk a little bit about, we talked a little bit before we went live here. And, one of the things that we were talking about was this unique value that new space companies are actually bringing to established, larger enterprise size space companies. And I think you're kind of alluding to some of this with what you're saying here. So, can you go into a little bit more detail there?
Sure. If you think about just the recent merger and acquisition activity, as a matter of fact, this morning it was announced that SES was buying Intelsat. We have relationships with both of those companies that have been around for a long time, but now they're moving into a multi-orbit um, deal, if you will, and how we make the assets that SES just purchased and that Intelsat will continue to run as part of the larger SES business. How we make those more efficient, more effective, and more profitable, I'm sure is of great interest to the CEOs of both of those businesses. So, space-time being able to help make that happen really is and it works now, like it's a TRL-9 platform. It really can enable the merged business to operate in much better fashion with far more efficiency and effectiveness, and hopefully make their spectrums, parenthetically, far more profitable for them as they move into this new sort of hybrid space age.
Sure, sure. So, I mean, that's a huge merger, I think, for the industry. How do you see that impacting? Is that a good thing for the companies that are doing business with these companies? Is this a good thing or a bad thing, or what does this mean?
So I think if you're SES and Intelsat, it's a good thing, right? Each business was, well, as you know, they were trying to merge a little over a year ago, and it didn't work out. They came back. Kudos to them for coming back to the table to talk about how they could create shared value. But it gives them more access to more markets, but it also again creates, well, how are we going to make all these things speak to each other? But I think they know that, and I think they're, hopefully we'll be helping them going forward. But for them to be able to offer services from GEO with their partnerships that they have with LEO partners, and then creating a MEO capability. Obviously, SES already had Empower O3B and then Empower. Now that they've started to launch in MEO, this is now a large company that will be operating in all three major orbits, and
Sure.
the opportunities to deliver, as of yet undelivered services is enormous for that new business.
Indeed. So you were talking about this idea of multi-orbit networks. What does that mean for enterprise customers that are, what are they keeping connected? How does that impact, kind of, I guess, from a user perspective, obviously business user perspective? What kind of use cases can that support in better ways than, I mean, what we would have had previously?
Sure. Well, I mean, a couple of things. If some people have KA bands, some people have KU bands, some people have other bands, and that's what they offer. By being able to, as a single business, being able to offer more bands for more customers, they can deliver those services much faster, but also probably more cost effectively for them and for their customers, which puts a lot of pressure on competition for those other satellite operators that are trying to deliver services today. So that's a really good thing for them. I think going forward, this is a two-way street. It's not just what the operator is delivering to the enterprise customer. It's what the enterprise customer now thinks they can create based on the services that are now available to them through a multi-orbit effort. So it's a little bit of a both coming from both ends, and the space economy continues to grow, and not only growing the space economy, but it's growing our planet's economy as well, just because of the diversity of capability. It's just going to continue to more people with more ideas to deliver greater capability. Of course, when you start talking multi-orbit, multi-domain connectivity, you need something like our own space-time platform. That's what it specializes in, is how do I make all of these things act as one network to deliver the very best service that I can for my business.
Right, right. So we actually spoke on a panel during the satellite show recently. And I think one of the use cases that you kind of talked about was, if you have, I don't know, goods that are traveling across international boundaries, and sometimes those international boundaries can also be boundaries in terms of what types of satellite networks can be utilized to keep those goods, kind of being able to track those goods. Is that a good use case example? And can you talk a little bit more about just how does this actually play out in reality?
Sure. I mean, there are many rules around the planet that say your spectrum cannot cross this border. You have to have licenses for all of what you're trying to do. If you now have started to create a global set of nodes whereby you can deliver on your customers' needs without, I don't want to say violating, but making sure that you stay within the lines of everything that you can't cross. You can't do that today. Like, it's very difficult to do if you're doing multi-orbit and multi-domain stuff, but you can with space-time, because it just is, we enter it as a constraint, and space-time finds the best connectivity pathway for you while taking that constraint into consideration. It's it's becoming more and more complex in the world about how we can and cannot deliver connectivity services. And the days of being able to do it by yourself as a company are coming to an end. I think you need to have connectivity platforms like Spacetime in order to take into consideration all the constraints that a truly global business, and a business that owns assets that are traveling at 17,000 or 8,000 miles per hour around the planet, is definitely a global business. It's just going to increase. It will just increase. But I do think the shared value is, obviously, we're able to help, and they're able to deliver meet their SLAs in much better fashion.
Sure, sure. So, kind of turning over to some different questions a little bit, and just kind of talking about the development of Aalyria and how that has gone. What would you say are some of the most valuable business lessons that you've learned along that path?
Certainly the most important lesson is what you're building has to be useful and has to be applicable and scalable across what we would call a sticky use case, something that all 8 billion people on the planet, if they could, would use.
Yeah.
But I really think the most important part is the team that you put together. We were so fortunate when we acquired the technologies from Google that the original tech teams from Google also agreed to come with us. And that made our transition immeasurably easier to get started. And I'm happy to say that they're all still here and working hard. And so that for us, it was really, really something big. After that, look, you have to have a real understanding of what your value proposition is, and you have to be able to communicate it in a way that someone who is you're asking to part with their dollars and give them to you says, I wholly understand how you can add value to my business, and in some cases reimagine business models going forward. And that's really what we're asking people to do at Aalyria. It's not just about creating one link to another link. It really is about revisiting business models for a new economy, a digital and a space economy, and how do we enable and enhance those new business models for the future.
Right, right. If you were to start all over, is there anything that you would have done differently, knowing what you know now?
Oh man, that list is probably long, for sure. Um, in this particular case, not so much. That's not to say that everything's gone perfectly, but we really did start with an exceptional investor who's been doing this for 50 years, and he's a patient investor as well. We started with amazing technology that already had 300, $400, $500 million worth of investment in between the two technologies at Google, and we got the original technical teams to join us. That there isn't a finer team. They are remarkable at what they do, and my boss is patient and pays attention to what we're doing, of course. But I think in this case, I'm not sure that we would change a whole lot. I do think that it is a bit of a transition for everyone, going from working at a large tech company to a startup. I have been involved in startups before, so I was already aware of the beating that you can take on a daily basis until you really get up and running. And you found a product market fit that actually matters to the market, right? Without that, it's a struggle every single day. That has, that has borne out for us. We're fortunate we have larger commercial contracts with satellite operators and larger contracts with the U.S. government. People are sort of really realizing what Aalyria can do for them. But but look, it's always has to be about sort of this ruthless pursuit of excellence, no matter what you're doing, making sure that you over communicate with people. These sound so trite because you can read them in any startup book or whatever, but they're true. People want, especially smart people, want to understand what the plan is and their place within that plan and how they can do their very best. And also, I think when you work with just such intellectually talented people, you got to let them run free. Like you got to take. You shouldn't be pulling back on the reins. You should sort of be freeing them to gallop at their capability, and then your job is to sort of make sure that everybody is still galloping in the same direction. No, I mean it's been a fantastic experience. My first startup that I was involved in, where my wife and I funded it ourselves until we took on some investors. I had just left a large company, being the CEO of a large company, and the sheer tonnage of what I did not know, being a first-time startup CEO. I don't know how many tankers it would take to haul that somewhere, but it was a lot. It was a lot of a lot. I learned so much about, you really have. A friend of mine, one of my advisors here at Aalyria, said to me one day, you have to know how the watch works. If you're going to be successful, you have to understand how the watch works. And I didn't understand how the watch worked. Now, I had great friends who were working with us who sort of understood how the watch worked. But it wasn't enough to get us where we needed to be. So I took my beating, and I wish it had turned out differently for myself, for the investors. But it was absolutely a very impressionable learning experience for me. That's for sure.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about what other startups in the space industry you have your eye on right now.
Whew, that's a great question. Um, I think what K2 space is doing with their large mega and giga satellites that are going to put 10, 20 times more swap on orbit for a price that is, has been unthinkable, will absolutely change um, the new space market. I think the days of very exquisite, very expensive satellites, save for very particular missions, perhaps for the government or for something like the James Webb telescope.
Mhm.
Uh, Other than those things, I think the days of an exquisite, expensive satellite are gone, and I think K2 is leading the way into what will come next. I think there's other companies. So how do we, if we want to go further and faster in space to be the explorers that we are, we're going to have to find some way to get safe nuclear power into space. And I think companies like Antares, who are working on both terrestrial and space nuclear fuel programs is also going to be the way to go. It will happen. It has to happen in order for us to go anywhere past near space, which is just past the moon. We're going to have that. So companies who are doing that type of work that will take us further and more efficiently and for a much lower cost than we've been able to do it today. Those are the companies that I think are going to make the biggest impact on not just the space industry, but everything that flows from the space economy.
Sure, sure. Wow. Okay. We'll have to go check out those companies if we're not already familiar with them. So, if somebody wanted to learn more about Aalyria, definitely a company to watch. What should they do?
They can go to www.aalyria.com, AALYRIA.com, and check us out. More importantly, reach out to any of us. We're always happy to tell our story and, just talk about how we might be able to enhance or enable a business proposition or some public sector mission that really is important. And I don't mean that just for government or militaries. Look, space exploration with NASA and certainly the EO companies, Earth observation companies. These are all very, very, very important endeavors, and Aalyria is able to support those and much more. So when I say public sector, I mean not just public sector entities, but so many things that serve the public as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for making time to be here today, Chris. And of course, we invite everybody to go check out Aalyria. And I do want to take a moment to thank GuideForce for hosting these sessions. To learn more about GuideForce, you can visit guideforce.com. And we'll see you next time on the Startup Leaders Show.